My father sabotaged my restaurant just to please my brother, but this time I didn't let it slide. Look, I know how these stories usually go. Someone gets treated like garbage by their family, works their way up, and then comes the revenge arc, right? Well, mine's a bit different. My name is Jade, and what happened to me is probably one of the most satisfying disasters I've ever witnessed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. I was 18 when I finally figured out that my parents didn't just prefer my younger brother. They flat out worshipped him. I'm not being dramatic. From the time he was born, everything revolved around him. New shoes? He got 3 pairs while I wore mine until they fell apart. College fund? All for him. I was expected to just figure it out. Meanwhile, he coasted through life getting everything handed to him on a silver platter. The final straw came when I told them I wanted to go to culinary school. My mother actually laughed. Not a chuckle, a full mocking laugh. She said something like, "Why would we waste money on that when your brother needs it for his business degree?" My father just nodded along like she'd said something profound. My brother? He smirked at me from the couch where he was playing video games at 2 in the afternoon. So I left, packed my stuff, found a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, and got a job as a dishwasher at a local restaurant. It wasn't glamorous. My hands were raw from the hot water and chemicals. I smelled like grease and old food, but it was mine. My life, my choice, my paycheck. My family thought it was hilarious. My mother told everyone at church that I was learning a lesson by washing dishes. My brother posted something on social media about me being a professional plate cleaner, with a bunch of laughing emojis. My father called once to ask when I was going to stop this nonsense and come home to help support my brother's upcoming business venture. I didn't go home. Not for holidays, not for birthdays, nothing. Instead, I worked. I worked my ass off, actually. The head chef noticed that I showed up early, stayed late, and genuinely cared about the food even though I was just washing the dishes it was served on. After 6 months, he pulled me aside and asked if I wanted to learn prep work, then cooking, then more complex dishes. I soaked up everything like a sponge. The restaurant changed ownership when I was 23. The new owner was this quiet, serious businessman from overseas who'd made his fortune in some tech thing I didn't fully understand. He was looking for someone to really run the place while he focused on his other investments. By that point, I'd worked my way up to sous chef, and I guess I impressed him during the transition because he offered me the general manager position. I was terrified. I knew cooking, but managing finances, inventory, staff scheduling, marketing, that was a whole different beast. But the owner, let's call him my boss, he believed in me. He said I had something most managers didn't. I actually cared about every aspect of the restaurant because I'd worked every position. He wasn't wrong. So I took the job. And over the next 7 years, I transformed that place. I renegotiated contracts with suppliers, revamped the menu, trained the staff to actually give a damn about service, and managed the books so tightly we went from barely breaking even to making serious profit. The restaurant became known in the area. We got written up in local magazines. Food bloggers came. We had to start taking reservations weeks in advance. My boss gave me complete autonomy. He'd check in maybe once a month, look at the numbers, nod approvingly, and let me keep doing my thing. He paid me well, really well, and I finally felt like I'd made something of myself. During all this time, I'd had almost no contact with my family. Maybe a text on major holidays that I'd respond to politely and briefly. I knew my brother had started his company with my parents' money, all their savings plus a loan they'd taken out against their house. I didn't ask for details. It wasn't my circus anymore. But then, about 10 years after I'd left home, my mother called and asked if we could meet for coffee. She sounded different, less judgmental, almost respectful. I was suspicious, but I agreed. We met at a coffee shop halfway between us. She asked about my life. I told her I was managing a restaurant. I said, I have a restaurant now, because that's how it felt, like it was mine, even though technically I was just the general manager. She didn't ask for clarification, and honestly, I didn't correct her assumption. Maybe that makes me a bad person. Maybe it was a little revenge. I don't know. She seemed impressed. She mentioned that my brother's business was doing well, but was vague about details. Then she asked if she and my father and brother could come see the restaurant sometime. I thought about saying no, but part of me, the petty part that I'm not always proud of, wanted them to see what I'd built without them. So I said yes. I set it up for a Saturday evening, one of our busiest nights. I wanted them to see the place at its best. They arrived dressed up, which surprised me. My father wore a suit. My mother had on a dress I'd never seen before. My brother looked uncomfortable in a button-down shirt and slacks. I greeted them at the door and led them to a table I'd reserved in the main dining room where they could see the open kitchen, the full bar, the elegant decor that I'd personally chosen and budgeted for. The host called me ma'am and asked if I needed anything. The servers called me boss as they passed. I showed them around, the wine cellar I'd organized, the kitchen where I'd trained half the staff personally, and finally my office with my name on a placard on the door. They were stunned, absolutely stunned. My mother kept touching things like she couldn't believe they were real. My father asked questions about revenue and overhead that I answered confidently because I knew every number by heart. And my brother? He went quiet. Really quiet. The kind of quiet that meant he was seething inside. We had dinner. They ordered expensive dishes. The food was perfect because I'd trained those cooks myself. My mother cried a little and said she was proud of me. My father nodded a lot and looked around like he was recalculating everything he thought he knew about me. My brother barely touched his food. As they left, my mother hugged me. My father shook my hand firmly. My brother muttered something that might have been congratulations. I watched them leave and felt satisfied. Not happy, exactly, but satisfied. They'd finally seen that I wasn't a failure, that I'd succeeded despite them, not because of them. I should have known that satisfaction wouldn't last. About a week later, my mother called again. This time, her voice had that tone, the one I remembered from childhood when she wanted something. She asked how the restaurant was doing financially. I told her it was doing great, which was true. She asked if I owned it outright or if I had investors. I said it was complicated, which was also true, just not in the way she thought. She didn't press, but I could hear something calculating in her voice when she said goodbye. That should have been my first warning sign. Instead, I went back to work, back to my normal life, completely unaware that I'd just set a timer on a bomb that would explode in the most spectacular way possible. But that's a story for the next update. So here's the thing about lies of omission. They have a way of snowballing. I didn't technically lie to my family about owning the restaurant. I just didn't correct their assumption. In my defense, they didn't ask directly, and after years of them treating me like garbage, I didn't feel particularly obligated to clarify. Was it petty? Absolutely. Do I regret it? Well, you'll have to wait and see. Life went back to normal for a few months. The restaurant kept thriving. We were consistently booked solid on weekends. I'd negotiated a deal with a local farm for seasonal produce that cut costs and improved quality. My boss sent me an email saying the profit margins were the best he'd seen in any of his investments. I was riding high. It was a Thursday afternoon when my mother called and asked if they could all come over to my apartment for dinner. Not the restaurant. My apartment. That was odd. I lived in a decent one-bedroom place, nothing fancy, but it was mine and I'd furnished it nicely with money I'd actually earned. I said sure, thinking maybe they wanted to actually connect on a personal level for once. So, sweetheart, we've been thinking. Your brother's company has been doing well, but he needs to expand to stay competitive. Your father and I have been discussing investment opportunities, and we wondered if you might want to go in on it together. A real family business, you know. I stopped with a stack of plates in my hands. What? My father jumped in. Your brother needs about $50,000 for equipment and expansion. We've already invested everything we have. But if you could match that amount, we could really make this work. Think of it as a family investment. $50,000. They wanted me to give my brother $50,000 after they'd spent my entire childhood giving him everything while I got nothing. The audacity was actually impressive. I can't do that, I said carefully. My money is tied up in the restaurant. My brother finally looked up from his phone. Come on, you own a successful restaurant. You're pulling in serious cash. $50,000 is nothing to you. It's not that simple, I said. My mother's face did that thing, that disappointed look I remembered from childhood. After everything we've done for you, you can't help your own brother? I wanted to laugh, or scream, maybe both. What exactly have you done for me? The room went ice cold. My father stood up, his face reddening. We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. The legal minimum required by law, I shot back. Meanwhile, you gave him everything and told me to figure it out on my own, which I did. And now you want me to just hand over $50,000? The argument escalated from there. Voices were raised. Old wounds were reopened. My mother cried. My father said I was selfish. My brother called me a bitch. I told them all to leave. They did, but not before my mother said something that chilled me. You're going to regret this. Family is supposed to help family, and you'll learn that lesson one way or another. I locked the door behind them, poured myself a large glass of wine, and tried to calm down. I should have paid more attention to that threat. Over the next few weeks, the pressure ramped up. My mother called every single day, crying about how my brother's business was struggling. My father sent long text messages about family loyalty and responsibility. My brother showed up at the restaurant twice, trying to talk to me during service, making a scene in front of customers until I had security escort him out. They tag-teamed me. When one approach didn't work, they tried another. Guilt, anger, manipulation, fake reconciliation attempts. My mother even tried to get my old friends to call me and tell me I was being unreasonable. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions about my financial decisions. I blocked their numbers. All of them. I changed my schedule so I was harder to track down. I told my staff not to let any of them into the restaurant. I thought that would be the end of it. But then my brother's business actually did start failing. Not because I didn't help, because he was terrible at running a company. My mother called from a different number to tell me they'd remortgaged their house to try to save his business. My father left a voicemail saying they were in serious financial trouble, and it was partially my fault for refusing to help. I felt guilty for about 30 seconds. Then I remembered their years of favoritism. My guilt evaporated. I focused on my work. We launched a new brunch menu that became incredibly popular. I hired 2 new sous chefs and a pastry chef. We got a glowing review in a regional food magazine. Life was actually good. Then, about 6 months after that disastrous dinner at my apartment, I got an emergency call from my mother from yet another new number. I almost didn't answer, but something in my gut told me to pick up. "Your brother's business is bankrupt," she said without preamble. Her voice was hollow. "We've lost everything trying to save it. The house is being foreclosed on. Your father's retirement savings are gone. We need help, and you're the only one who can provide it." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully, "but I can't help you financially. Can't or won't." My father's voice came through. She'd had me on speaker. "Won't," I said firmly. "You made your choices. You invested everything in him despite all the warning signs. That's not my responsibility." My mother's voice turned sharp. "You're going to regret this. You keep saying that, but I don't think you understand what regret actually means," I replied. "I have to go. I'm at work." I hung up and blocked that number too. 2 days later, I had to take an emergency trip to meet with suppliers in another city. My boss had arranged it, some special deal on seasonal seafood that could save us thousands per month. It was a 2-day trip, and I couldn't postpone it. The problem was my boss insisted someone needed to supervise the restaurant in my absence. Not just the head chef, someone who could handle any major issues that might come up. I was stuck. My assistant manager was on vacation. My most senior server was capable but not ready for that level of responsibility. And then, in a moment of stupidity I will regret for the rest of my life, I thought about my father. He had business experience. He knew how to be professional. Maybe, despite everything, he could just watch the place for 2 days. I called him. He agreed immediately. Too immediately. Should have been my second warning sign. Before I left, I gave him explicit instructions. Just observe. Don't make any changes. Don't touch anything. If there's an emergency, call me. That's it. He nodded along, looking almost humble. I should have known better. But I got in my car and drove to that supplier meeting, leaving my father alone in the restaurant I'd built from nothing. The restaurant my family believed I owned. The biggest mistake of my life. But I didn't know that yet. The supplier meeting went perfectly. We negotiated an amazing deal on fresh seafood that was going to cut our costs by 15% while actually improving quality. I was feeling good. Accomplished. I remember sitting in my hotel room that first night, looking at the contract I'd just signed, thinking about how far I'd come from washing dishes with raw, cracked hands. I called the restaurant to check in. My father answered, which made sense since I'd told him to stay near the office phone. He said everything was fine. Service had been smooth. No problems. His voice was calm, professional. I actually felt relieved that I'd been worried for nothing. "How were the reservations?" I asked. "Full house," he said. "Everything under control. Any issues with the kitchen?" "None. The staff is very professional." I should have heard something in his tone, some hint of the satisfaction of someone who was lying perfectly. But I was tired from driving and negotiating all day, and I wanted to believe things were okay. "Great. I'll call tomorrow to check in again. Remember, just observe, I know. Don't worry about anything here. Focus on your meeting tomorrow." I hung up feeling oddly uneasy but unable to pinpoint why. The second day, I tried calling 3 times. My father didn't answer. I told myself he was probably busy with something. Maybe a rush at lunch. Maybe he stepped away from the desk. The head chef didn't answer his cell either, which was weird, but not unheard of during a busy service. By the time I was driving home that evening, I had this pit in my stomach that was growing with every mile. I called again. Still no answer. I called the restaurant's main line. A server I'd hired 2 months ago answered, and she sounded off. Is everything okay there? I asked. There was a pause. I think you should probably come in when you get back. What happened? I don't want to say over the phone, but, your dad, there have been some situations. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What kind of situations? Just come in, please. I drove 20 miles over the speed limit the rest of the way home. When I walked into my restaurant at 9 p.m. on that Tuesday night, the dining room was half empty. On a Tuesday. We were never half empty on a Tuesday. The staff looked at me with these expressions I couldn't quite read. Pity mixed with anger, mixed with confusion. The head chef met me before I could even take off my coat. We need to talk, in your office. Now. I followed him, my heart pounding. He closed the door behind us and just looked at me for a long moment. What happened? I asked. He ran a hand over his face. Your father happened. Jade, what the hell was he doing here? He was just supposed to observe. I needed someone to... He didn't observe. Look, I don't even know where to start. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling. Okay, day 1, yesterday. He started by calling 3 of our biggest reservation parties and telling them we were overbooked and had to cancel. Just flat out canceled them. No explanation, no apology, just canceled. My stomach dropped. What? Then, he was incredibly rude to multiple customers during dinner service. Cold. Almost hostile. One couple asked to speak to a manager, and he told them the manager wasn't available and they could either eat their food or leave. They left. Without paying? By the way, because he'd pissed them off so badly they felt justified walking out. I felt sick. There's more, isn't there? Oh, there's more. Today, day 2, he really outdid himself. The chef pulled up something on his phone. He called our primary seafood supplier and told them we were closing down and to cancel all future orders. Then he called our produce supplier and said the same thing. Our meat supplier, our bakery. He systematically called every major supplier and told them we're going out of business. He what? My voice came out as barely a whisper. That's not even the worst part. We had that food critic scheduled for tonight. You know, the one from the regional magazine? The one you've been planning for 2 months? I nodded, unable to speak. Your father seated him at the worst table in the house, right by the kitchen door, and then proceeded to basically ignore him all evening. When the critic finally complained, your father loudly announced in front of the entire dining room that the restaurant was having severe financial difficulties and might not be open much longer. The critic left without finishing his meal. I sat down heavily in my chair. You're joking. I wish I was. But wait, there's still more. We had a VIP diner tonight. You know that businessman who comes in monthly and brings different clients? Spends at least $500 every visit? Please don't tell me. Your father told him the food quality had declined significantly and suggested he try somewhere else. To his face. The guy was furious. He's apparently friends with half the business owners in the city, and he's already told several of them not to come here. I put my head in my hands. This can't be real. There's one more thing. The chef's voice got quieter. At some point today, he went into the office system and canceled all our reservations for the next week. All of them. Every single booking. People started calling to confirm, and our host had to tell them their reservations didn't exist anymore. Most of them made other plans. I looked up at him. Where is he now? He left about an hour ago. Said his job was done and walked out. His job was done. The words echoed in my head. I spent the next 2 hours going through everything. Every cancellation. Every supplier he'd contacted. Every bit of damage he'd managed to do in just 2 days. The more I uncovered, the more deliberate it all seemed. This wasn't incompetence. This was sabotage. Calculated. Intentional. Thorough. When I finally went to check the daily deposits, I found another problem. The cash drawer was short. Not by a little bit. By $8,000. I checked the security footage and watched my father calmly open the safe with the code I'd stupidly given him, count out stacks of bills, and put them in his jacket pocket. He looked directly at the camera as he did it. He knew he was being recorded. He didn't care. I sat in my office until 3 in the morning making lists. Lists of the damage. Lists of what needed to be fixed. Lists of people I needed to call. The numbers kept growing. The more I calculated, the worse it got. The immediate cash stolen, $8,000. The canceled reservations. At least 2 weeks of fully booked services. Probably $30,000 in lost revenue. The canceled supplier contracts. impossible to immediately calculate, but replacing them would be expensive and time-consuming. The VIP customer, he'd spent $6,000 with us over the past year and brought in referrals. His bad word of mouth? Potentially devastating. The food critic? That review could have brought in months of new business. Now, we'd be lucky if he didn't trash us in print. And the catering contracts? I'd forgotten about those. We had 3 big corporate catering jobs scheduled. I checked my email. All 3 companies had sent cancellation notices. My father had apparently contacted them too and told them we couldn't fulfill the orders. By the time the sun came up, I'd calculated the total damage at somewhere around $30,000 in immediate losses, plus probably triple that in future business and reputation damage. And the worst part? I'd let him in. I'd trusted him. After everything, I'd actually believed he could act like a professional for 2 days. I pulled up the security footage one more time and watched him lock up and leave. He was smiling. Actually smiling as he walked out of my restaurant after destroying everything I'd worked for. That's when I knew. This wasn't collateral damage from incompetence. This was revenge. They'd asked for money, I'd said no, and they'd decided to destroy me. I picked up my phone and did 3 things. First, I called my boss. It was 6 in the morning, but this couldn't wait. Second, I started downloading all the security footage to a hard drive. Third, I sent 1 text message to my father. I know what you did. All of it. His response came within 2 minutes. Good. That single word told me everything I needed to know. They'd declared war, and they thought they'd won. But they'd made one critical mistake. They didn't actually know whose restaurant they'd just sabotaged, and that mistake was going to cost them everything. My boss, answered on the 3rd ring. I could hear sleep in his voice, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. My voice was shaking as I explained what happened. Every detail, every malicious act, every dollar lost. I expected anger, fury, maybe even blame directed at me for bringing my father in. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then he said something I didn't expect. Do you have proof of all this? Every second on security cameras, plus witness statements from the entire staff, plus email confirmations from the suppliers and catering companies. It's all documented. Good. Send everything to me. I'll have my lawyers look at it first thing this morning. His voice was calm. Too calm. That scary kind of calm that comes before a storm. We'll handle this properly. Through the legal system. Do not contact your family yourself. Not yet. But, Jade, I need you to trust me on this. If we're going to pursue this criminally, and we are, we need to do it right. Let the lawyers handle it. You focus on damage control at the restaurant. Can you do that? I took a breath. Yes. Good. Send me everything within the hour. I'll be in the office by 8. He hung up. I spent the next 45 minutes compiling everything. Video footage, financial records, staff statements, supplier communications, everything. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. By noon, my boss's lawyers had sent a legal letter to my family's address. I didn't see it, they didn't tell me what it said, but apparently it was just a formal notice that legal action was being considered and they should retain legal counsel. I wanted to confront them myself. I wanted to scream at them, ask them how they could do this. But the lawyers were firm, no contact. Let them handle it. So I focused on saving the restaurant. I called every single supplier personally, explained there had been a misunderstanding, assured them we were very much still in business. Most were understanding. A few required me to prepay the next order to rebuild trust, which hurt financially but was necessary. I contacted every canceled reservation and offered a free appetizer if they'd give us another chance. About half agreed to rebook. The others had made other plans and were polite but firm. The catering clients were harder. 2 of the 3 refused to even discuss it. The 3rd agreed to give us a smaller event as a trial run. The VIP customer never returned my calls. The food critic's review came out 3 days later. It was worse than I'd imagined. He didn't just criticize the food. He wrote about the chaotic management and concerning financial instability and unprofessional atmosphere. He ended with, "Until this establishment gets its house in order, diners should look elsewhere." That review cost us 20% of our reservations over the following 2 weeks. I worked 16-hour days trying to repair the damage. My staff was incredible. They rallied around me, worked extra shifts, gave exceptional service to every customer who did come in. Slowly, painfully slowly, we started to stabilize. 2 weeks after the sabotage, the lawyers called me in for a meeting. They'd been building a case, compiling evidence, interviewing witnesses. They laid out everything they'd found, and it was damning. My father had committed multiple crimes, theft, fraud, commercial sabotage, defamation. They had him on camera stealing the money. They had recorded phone calls to suppliers. They had witness statements from customers he'd insulted. "We're ready to file criminal charges," the lead lawyer said. "But before we do, we want you to confront them. With us present, of course, and being recorded. We want their reaction on tape, their admissions. It'll seal the case. You want me to tell them I'm pressing charges? Not exactly. We want you to confront them about what they did. Let them brag about it, because they will. People like this always do. They'll confess to everything thinking they've gotten away with it, and then we'll have them on tape admitting to multiple felonies." I understood the strategy. I hated it. But I understood it. 3 days later, I showed up at my parents' house with a lawyer and a briefcase full of evidence. My hands were sweating. My heart was racing. But I was also calm, weirdly calm, like I'd stepped outside my body and was watching this happen to someone else. My mother answered the door. She looked surprised to see me, but she let me in. My father and brother were in the living room. They all looked at me with these smug expressions that made my stomach turn. "Well," my father said, "come to apologize? To finally help your family?" I set my briefcase on the coffee table and opened it slowly. Inside was a laptop and stacks of printed documents. "Actually, I came to talk about what happened at the restaurant." My mother's smile faltered slightly. "What about it?" I turned the laptop around so they could see the screen. Security footage, day 1, my father canceling reservations. "This is interesting viewing. Want to see more?" The smiles disappeared from all their faces, but my father leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. "So? I did what needed to be done." "What needed to be done?" I echoed softly. "You refused to help your family. Your brother was going bankrupt. We'd lost everything trying to save him. So yes, I decided to take you down too. Why should you be successful when the rest of us were failing?" He said it like it was the most logical thing in the world. My mother jumped in. "You deserved it. Honestly. Walking away from us. Refusing to help your own brother when he needed you most. You needed to learn that family comes first." I looked at my brother. "And you? What do you think about all this?" He shrugged, that same smirk from childhood on his face. "I think it's funny. You acted so high and mighty. And now you're ruined just like me. Lost everything. Must suck, huh? So you all think I deserve to have my business destroyed? Your business." My father laughed. "The business we thought you cared about so much? The one you prioritized over your own family? Yeah, I'd say you deserve to lose it." My mother nodded. "Maybe now you'll understand what it's like to lose everything. Maybe you'll develop some empathy." They were all nodding, agreeing with each other, justifying what they'd done, building up their righteous anger, getting more confident with each word. I let them talk, let them confess to everything, let them brag about how thoroughly they'd destroyed me. I sat there in silence, watching them, my face carefully neutral. Finally, my brother said, "So what now? You here to beg us to help you rebuild? Because I'm not begging for anything," I interrupted quietly. My father snorted. "Then why are you here?" I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't even a satisfied smile. It was just a smile. Small and cold and absolutely final. "I'm here because I wanted to see your faces when I told you the truth." I paused, letting the moment stretch out. "I don't own that restaurant." The room went dead silent. "What?" my mother whispered. "I'm the general manager. I'm an employee. A very well-paid employee with significant autonomy, but still an employee. The restaurant belongs to someone else entirely." I watched the color drain from all their faces, watched comprehension dawn, watched the horror set in. "You sabotaged someone else's business," I continued in that same quiet voice. "You stole from someone else. You defamed someone else's establishment. You cost someone else tens of thousands of dollars. And that someone else is very, very wealthy and has very, very expensive lawyers." My brother stood up suddenly. No, you said you had a restaurant." "I said I have a restaurant, not that I own it. You all assumed, and I didn't correct you. But that's not illegal. What you did? That's extremely illegal." My father's hands were shaking. "This is a misunderstanding. You thought you were destroying your daughter's livelihood as revenge for not giving you money. Instead, you committed multiple felonies against a businessman with the resources to absolutely bury you in legal fees alone." I closed the laptop and stood up. "The lawyers will be in touch. Expect criminal charges within the week." My mother started crying. "You can't do this. You can't send your own family to jail." I'm not sending you anywhere. You did this to yourselves. I picked up my briefcase. You wanted me to learn a lesson about consequences? Congratulations. You're about to learn that lesson yourselves. I walked to the door. Behind me, I could hear my mother sobbing, my father yelling, my brother saying no, no, no over and over. I stopped at the threshold and looked back one more time. For what it's worth, I meant what I said about family coming first, but you stopped being my family a long time ago. You just didn't realize it until now. I walked out and closed the door behind me. The lawyer who'd been waiting in the car looked at me. You okay? I took a deep breath of cold air. Yeah, I am. He smiled. We got everything we needed. They confessed to everything. This is going to be the easiest case I've ever prosecuted. Good, I said. And I meant it. They'd tried to destroy me. Instead, they'd destroyed themselves. And honestly, I felt absolutely nothing watching it happen. Maybe that made me cold. Maybe that made me unforgiving. But after a lifetime of being the disposable daughter, I was finally free. The consequences were just getting started. And the legal system moves slower than you'd think. But once it starts moving, it's like watching a glacier crush everything in its path. Methodical, unstoppable, inevitable. The criminal charges were filed 4 days after that confrontation. My boss's legal team didn't mess around. They went for everything they could possibly throw at them. Theft, commercial sabotage, fraud, defamation, conspiracy. The police showed up at my parents' house with a warrant and arrested all 3 of them on the same day. I wasn't there for the arrests, but I heard about it from my former neighbor who still lived on their street. Apparently, my mother screamed the whole time. My father tried to explain it was all a misunderstanding. My brother attempted to run out the back door and got tackled by an officer in the backyard. The whole neighborhood watched it happen. Part of me felt guilty. A small part. But then I'd remember my father's smug smile as he admitted to destroying what he thought was my livelihood out of pure spite, and the guilt would evaporate like steam. They each retained lawyers. Cheap ones. Because they'd bankrupted themselves trying to save my brother's failing company. The kind of lawyers who handled DUIs and small claims cases, not major felony charges. My boss's legal team, meanwhile, consisted of 3 partners from one of the most expensive firms in the state. This was not going to be a fair fight. The preliminary hearing was surreal. I had to testify about what happened, walking through each act of sabotage in chronological order. The prosecutor played the security footage. Hours of it. My father stealing cash from the safe, looking directly at the camera with that satisfied expression. My father rudely dismissing customers. The timestamps matching perfectly with the canceled reservations and supplier calls. Then things got even messier. The restaurant recovered slowly, painfully slowly. I worked myself to exhaustion rebuilding relationships with suppliers, reaching out to customers personally, creating promotions to bring people back in. My staff was incredible. They could have jumped ship to other restaurants, but they stayed. They believed in what we were building. My boss checked in regularly. He never once blamed me for bringing my father in, even though this whole disaster was technically my fault. He just kept asking what I needed to make things right. 6 months after the sabotage, we finally got back to breaking even. Not profiting, just breaking even. The damage had been that severe, but it was progress. The trial date was set. Both sides finished discovery. The prosecutor's case was airtight. They had video evidence, audio recordings, documents, witness testimony, and the defendant's own admissions. The defense had basically nothing. Their lawyers suggested they take a plea deal. My father refused. He wanted to go to trial, convinced that a jury would see his side of things, would understand that he was a desperate father trying to help his son, and teach his daughter a lesson about family loyalty. His lawyer actually withdrew from the case over this decision. He had to get a new one, an even cheaper one, who took one look at the evidence and probably realized this was career suicide but needed the money. My mother and brother, facing their own charges, decided to take plea deals, lighter sentences in exchange for testimony against my father. The family that had been so united in their hatred of me completely fell apart when prison became a real possibility. The trial lasted 6 days. I had to testify on day 3. I walked into that courtroom, put my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Then I told it. All of it. The childhood favoritism, the years of working my way up, the reconciliation attempt, the misunderstanding about ownership that I didn't correct, the sabotage, the confrontation, everything. The defense attorney tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone who'd set up her own family, as someone who'd deliberately misled them. But the evidence didn't support that narrative. I'd never claimed to own the restaurant. They'd assumed. I'd never invited them to sabotage it. They'd done that entirely on their own. I'd never pressed charges. My boss had, as the actual victim. During cross-examination, the defense attorney asked, "Do you feel any remorse for the situation your family is in?" I looked at my father, sitting at the defendant's table in an ill-fitting suit. He stared back at me with pure hatred. "No," I said simply. "They made their choices. These are the consequences." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. 3 hours to decide the fate of 3 people who'd spent their lives putting one child on a pedestal and treating the other like she was disposable. When they came back, I was sitting in the gallery. My boss was next to me. His hand was steady on my shoulder as the verdicts were read. Guilty on all counts, every single one. My father's face went gray. My mother burst into tears. My brother just stared at the table. And me? I felt nothing. Just empty. Not satisfied. Not sad. Just empty. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. That's when the real consequences would begin. The 2 weeks between the verdict and sentencing were strange. Surreal, even. I went to work, ran the restaurant, came home, slept, and repeated. Everything felt muted, like I was moving through water. People kept asking me how I felt, and I genuinely didn't know how to answer. The sentencing hearing was on a Friday morning. I took the day off work, something I never did, and wore the nicest suit I owned. My boss insisted on coming with me. He didn't have to be there. The legal stuff was essentially over. But he came anyway and sat beside me in the courtroom gallery. My father was brought in first. He'd lost weight in jail. His suit hung off him. He looked older than I remembered. When he saw me in the gallery, his expression hardened into something ugly. The prosecutor stood and outlined the crimes: commercial sabotage, theft, fraud, defamation. He detailed the financial damage, the stolen cash, the lost contracts, the destroyed reputation. He mentioned that the restaurant had still not fully recovered 6 months later, that we were barely breaking even when we should have been thriving. Then he played the recording again. My father's voice, clear and proud, admitting he'd destroyed everything deliberately as revenge. I did what needed to be done. Those words echoed through the quiet courtroom. The defense attorney, the new cheap one, gave a speech about how my father was a desperate man who'd made poor choices under extreme stress, how he'd lost everything trying to save his son, how he'd acted out of misguided love for his family. It was almost touching, if you ignored the part where he'd committed multiple felonies with premeditation and zero remorse. The judge wasn't moved. She was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse in the world and wasn't impressed by any of them. "You didn't make a mistake," she said, looking directly at my father. "You planned and executed a deliberate attack on a business because your daughter wouldn't give you money. You stole cash. You destroyed contracts. You defamed the establishment. You did all of this knowing it was wrong, and you did it anyway. Then, when confronted, you expressed pride in your actions." My father opened his mouth to speak. The judge held up a hand. "The only reason this case exists is because you targeted the wrong victim. If your daughter had actually owned that restaurant, you likely would have gotten away with destroying her livelihood because she probably wouldn't have had the resources to fight you legally. But you didn't destroy your daughter's business. You destroyed someone else's. And that person had the resources to ensure you faced justice." She paused, looking down at her paperwork. "Commercial sabotage, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft, and defamation. I'm sentencing you to 4 years in state prison, followed by 3 years probation. You will also be required to pay restitution in the amount of $43,000 to cover documented losses, plus an additional $30,000 for reputation damage and lost future business. Given your current financial situation, I understand you cannot pay this immediately. Your assets will be liquidated and the funds applied to restitution. Any remaining balance will be converted to a lien. 4 years." My father's face went white. His lawyer started to object, but the judge was already moving on to the next case. My mother was next. She looked smaller than I remembered. Fragile. She'd taken the plea deal, so her sentencing was more straightforward. 3 years in prison, 2 years probation, joint and several liability for the restitution amount. She cried through the entire proceeding. I felt nothing watching her. My brother's sentencing was almost anticlimactic. 2 years in prison, 2 years probation, also liable for restitution. He'd tried to throw our father under the bus, which the judge noted with obvious disapproval, but his actual involvement had been less direct than my parents'. He stared at the floor the entire time, never once looking at anyone. After each sentencing, they were let out in handcuffs. My mother tried to turn and look at me as she was being escorted out. I met her eyes but didn't change my expression. She looked away first. When it was over, my boss and I walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine that felt wrong somehow. Like the weather should have been gloomy to match the weight of what had just happened. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "They're going to prison. For years. Because of me. Not because of you. Because of what they chose to do." He turned to look at me. "You didn't make them sabotage the restaurant. You didn't make them steal. You didn't make them do any of it. They decided to hurt you, and they hurt my business instead. These consequences are theirs, not yours." Intellectually, I knew he was right. Emotionally, I felt like I was drowning. The media coverage after sentencing was intense. Family gets prison time for restaurant revenge plot was everywhere. My name was mentioned in some articles. I got interview requests from local news stations, podcasts, even a true crime blogger. I declined all of them. This wasn't entertainment. This was my life falling apart and being reconstructed into something I barely recognized. The restitution order meant my parents' house was being sold. The house I grew up in. The house where I'd spent 18 years being the forgotten daughter. It was going to be liquidated to pay my boss for damages they'd caused. They'd also lose my father's truck, my mother's car, anything of value they owned. They'd get out of prison with nothing. Part of me, a small, ugly part, was satisfied by that. The larger part just felt tired. My brother's wife left him. She'd filed for divorce 2 weeks after he was arrested. Can't say I blamed her. She had 2 kids to think about, and being married to a felon with no income and no prospects wasn't exactly a great situation. The kids, my niece and nephew who I'd barely known, were staying with her parents. The restaurant was the weird part. 3 months after sentencing, I got a letter from my mother. It was sent from prison, written on lined paper in her shaky handwriting. She apologized. Sort of. It was one of those apologies that's mostly justifications and explanations. "I'm sorry you felt hurt, but we were desperate. I'm sorry it came to this, but we thought we were doing what was right." Never just, "I'm sorry. What I did was wrong." She asked if I'd put money on her commissary account, if I'd visit, if I'd write back. I didn't respond. I kept the letter for a week, reading it over and over, trying to find actual remorse in there somewhere. I never found it. Eventually, I threw it away. My father sent nothing. Apparently, he'd told other inmates that his daughter had betrayed the family, and he'd disowned me. Fine. The feeling was mutual. My brother sent a 2-sentence email from prison. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you can forgive me someday." I appreciated that it was short and didn't try to justify anything. I didn't respond to that either, but I appreciated it. My hands were shaking as I took the document. I don't know what to say. Say yes, sign the papers, become my business partner. He raised his glass. You've been running this place like you owned it anyway. Time to make it official. I signed the papers right there at the bar, my signature messy because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I looked up, he was smiling. "Welcome to ownership," he said. We toasted with whiskey that probably cost more than my first apartment's monthly rent. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt something other than numbness or exhaustion or anger. I felt pride. Real, genuine pride in what I'd accomplished. Sometimes justice doesn't just mean punishment for the people who wronged you. Sometimes it means you win anyway, despite everything they did to stop you. That night, I went home to my apartment, looked at my signed partnership agreement, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the sabotage, the trial, the sentencing, and now this. I cried. For the first time since this all started, I actually cried. Not sad tears, not exactly. More like release. Like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. Tomorrow I'd go back to work. Back to rebuilding. Back to proving that they'd failed to break me. But tonight I let myself feel everything. The pain, the anger, the satisfaction, the pride, all of it. And when I was done crying, I felt lighter than I had in years. Owning 10% of the restaurant changed things in ways I didn't expect. Not the work itself, I was still doing the same job. Still working the same insane hours, still managing the same staff. But mentally, it was different. Every decision I made had more weight because it wasn't just my boss's money on the line. It was mine too. My mother got out on early release after serving 18 months of her 3-year sentence. Good behavior, apparently. I found out when she showed up at the restaurant on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office reviewing supplier contracts when my hostess knocked on the door. She looked uncomfortable. "There's someone here to see you," she said carefully. "She says she's your mother." My stomach dropped. "Tell her I'm not available." I tried. "She says she'll wait." The hostess paused. "She's been sitting at the bar for 20 minutes. She's making the staff uncomfortable." I closed my eyes and took a breath. "Fine. Send her back." My mother walked into my office looking nothing like the woman who'd raised me. She'd aged a decade in 18 months. Her hair was more gray than brown. She'd lost weight. Too much weight. Her clothes were worn and didn't fit properly. She looked like someone life had chewed up and spit out. "Hi, sweetie," she said, and her voice cracked on the word. "Don't call me that." I kept my voice flat. Professional. "What do you want?" She sat down without being invited. "I wanted to see you. To talk. To apologize. Really apologize this time." "Okay, apologize." She took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry. For everything. For how we treated you growing up. For the favoritism. For what we did to this restaurant. For not believing in you. For..." She trailed off, tears starting to fall. "For being a terrible mother." It was the apology I'd wanted for years. The words I'd needed to hear since childhood. And sitting there, listening to her say them, I felt nothing. Maybe that made me cold. Maybe I was too damaged to feel anything anymore. Or maybe it was just too late for words to matter. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come here now?" "Because I've had 18 months to think about what I did. What we did. I lost everything. My freedom, my home, my marriage. Your father won't speak to me. He blames me for not controlling you better. Your brother..." She wiped her eyes. "Your brother won't talk to any of us. He's still in prison and he's refused every visit I've tried to make. So you came to me because everyone else abandoned you." She flinched. "That's not..." "I came because you're my daughter and I love you and I'm sorry." Where was that love when I needed it? When I was 18 and working as a dishwasher and you all mocked me? When I asked for help and you laughed? When I needed parents and you were too busy worshiping my brother? My voice stayed level, but each word was sharp. "You don't get to be sorry now just because you're alone." My therapist said I was making progress, that I was building a life separate from my family trauma, that I was learning to define myself by what I'd accomplished rather than by what they'd done to me. She wasn't wrong, but it wasn't that simple. Some days I'd be fine. Other days I'd see something that reminded me of them and I'd spiral. A father and daughter having dinner together at the restaurant, laughing, and I'd have to step away before I started crying. A news story about a family business, and I'd remember how I'd worked so hard to build something only to have them try to destroy it. That night, after everyone left and I was closing up alone, I stood in the dining room and just looked around. At the tables I'd chosen, the art I'd hung, the menu I'd designed, the life I'd built from absolutely nothing. My family had tried to take this from me. They'd failed. And not only had they failed, they'd lost everything in the attempt. Was I supposed to feel bad about that? Maybe. But I didn't. I locked up and went home, and for the first time in 2 years, I slept through the night without nightmares about showing up to find the restaurant destroyed. Progress, right? That's what my therapist would say. I'd take it. I'd earned it. And tomorrow I'd get up and do it all again. Because that's what survivors do. We survive. We rebuild. We win. 3 years later, and the restaurant is thriving. Actually thriving. We're booked solid most nights, the reviews are excellent, and last month we got 4 stars from a national food critic. The write-up is framed in my office. My office as a part owner, because that's what I am now. About 8 months after the sabotage, my boss called me into his office. I thought I was in trouble. Instead, he pushed a document across the desk. 10% ownership. Actual equity. "You rebuilt what they destroyed," he said. "You stayed when most people would have walked away. This isn't charity, it's what you've earned." I signed the papers with shaking hands. The girl who started washing dishes for minimum wage now owns part of a successful restaurant. Funny how life works. My father served his full 4 years. He got into a fight with another inmate early on and lost any chance at early release. He got out 4 months ago. I know because my lawyer sent an automatic notification, part of the restraining order. He's required to stay at least 1,000 feet away from me and the restaurant. I heard through an old neighbor that he moved to a different state. Works some manual labor job. Lives alone. My mother tried to reconnect with him when he got out. He refused. Apparently, he blames her for everything. For not controlling me better. For the arrests. For losing everything. The family he destroyed for revenge turned on him in the end. My mother got early release after 18 months for good behavior. She showed up at the restaurant about 6 months ago. Just walked in during lunch service and asked to speak to me. The hostess came to get me looking uncomfortable. My mother looked like she'd aged 10 years. Gray hair, worn clothes, too thin. She sat across from my desk and apologized. Really apologized this time. For the favoritism, for the sabotage, for everything. She cried. She said she'd spent 18 months in prison thinking about what she'd done, about what she'd lost. I listened. When she finished, I said, "I appreciate you coming here, but an apology doesn't fix what you did. You and Dad tried to destroy my life. The only reason you're facing consequences is because you destroyed someone else's business instead. That's not my fault. That's yours." "I know," she said. "I know. But I'm trying to make amends. I'm working at a convenience store. I've been going to therapy. I hoped maybe we could start over." "We can't," I said. Not angry, just factual. "Too much has happened. I don't hate you. But I don't have room in my life for you either. I'm sorry." She left crying. I haven't seen her since. Part of me feels guilty about that. Most of me doesn't. My brother is different. He got out after 2 years and moved 3 states away. Got a job in construction. He doesn't try to contact me much. Maybe an email every 6 months, short ones, updates on his life. He's in AA. He's working on himself. He always ends with an apology. But he doesn't make excuses or ask for anything. A few weeks ago, I actually responded to one of his emails. Just 3 sentences. "I'm doing well. The restaurant is thriving. Maybe someday we can talk. But not yet." He wrote back within an hour. "Thank you. That's more than I deserve. I'll wait as long as it takes. I don't know if I'll ever be ready to have a relationship with him. Maybe, maybe not. But at least the door isn't completely sealed like it is with my parents." The restaurant itself recovered faster than I expected. The first 6 months after the sabotage were brutal, working 16-hour days, personally calling every customer who canceled, rebuilding supplier relationships. But the staff rallied around me. They could have jumped ship to other restaurants. They stayed. Now we're better than before. We've expanded our catering business. We hired 3 more people. We're working on opening a 2nd location next year. My boss, my partner, handles the business side while I focus on operations. It works. We have a new dishwasher. 19 years old, showed up 3 months ago looking for work. She reminds me of myself at that age. Scrappy, eager, willing to do the grunt work. She comes in early and stays late and asks 1,000 questions. Last week, I pulled her aside after service. "You interested in learning more than just dishes?" I asked. Her eyes went huge. "Like cooking?" "Like everything. Prep work, cooking, inventory, dealing with suppliers, all of it." "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes, absolutely, yes." I smiled. "Good. You start tomorrow. Come in an hour early." Watching her face light up felt better than any revenge could have. Someone should have done that for me when I was her age. They didn't, but I can do it for her. Last week, my partner threw a small celebration for the restaurant's anniversary. Just the staff, some champagne, a cake. One of my sous chefs gave a toast about how we'd come back from disaster stronger than before. Everyone cheered. I stood there thinking about how far I'd come, from the daughter nobody believed in to a restaurant owner teaching someone else how to succeed. After everyone left, I locked up alone, stood in the dining room looking at the tables, the bar, the open kitchen, the place my family tried to destroy, the place that's thriving now, 3 years later, because I refused to let their sabotage be the end of the story. I'm not going to lie and say I've forgiven them. I haven't. Maybe I never will. My father is out there somewhere, alone and bitter. My mother is working retail and living in a halfway house. My brother is in another state trying to rebuild his life. The family that was so united in their contempt for me destroyed itself through their own choices. And me? I'm here. In my restaurant. With my 10% ownership and my staff that respects me and my new dishwasher who looks at me like I'm someone worth learning from. I won. Not because I planned some elaborate revenge. I won because I survived, rebuilt, and kept going when everything fell apart. Because I chose to build something good instead of being destroyed by people who never valued me anyway. That's enough. That's more than enough. The kitchen smells like fresh bread. The reservation book is full for tonight. My new dishwasher will be here in an hour, ready to learn. Everything is exactly as it should be. And my family? They're not part of this story anymore. They're just people I used to know who made terrible choices and paid the price. I've got a dinner service to prep for, a restaurant to run, a future to build. And I'm going to do all of it without them, just like I always have.